I never imagined that one day I'd be sitting here, writing this out. At 35, I had spent over a decade of my life building everything from the ground up, carefully constructing a life I thought was secure, stable, and full of promise. I'm Nathan, and this is my story. I married Lisa when I was 26 and she was 22. Back then, I wasn't the man I am today. I was still hustling my way up from nothing. My family? They were more of a hindrance than a help. They always expected handouts, always wanted a piece of anything I earned, and frankly, I had to cut ties with them to make anything of myself. My first job as a teenager? Scrubbing floors at a cleaning service. From there, I worked my way up. I sold phones, then transitioned into sales, and eventually got into real estate and investments. It wasn't glamorous, but I was making it work. I built everything I had, piece by piece, and I was proud of that. I met Lisa when I was still figuring life out. She was a model, beautiful, full of energy, and totally out of my league in a lot of ways. I was driving my old beat-up car, still in the process of building my career, while she was at the top of her game. She had a few big-name clients, but her career started to decline as she got older. And yet, for some reason, she always carried herself like she was still a model on the runway, despite the fact that she never finished college, and her career had been fading for years. We married when I was 26. I wasn't wealthy, but I loved her, and I worked hard to build a comfortable life for us. We had 2 kids, Max, our 8-year-old son, and Sophie, who was 3. I was happy with our life, even though I still had goals that hadn't been met. I was working on growing our investments, building more assets for the future, so I could provide them with even more. I never imagined I was building a life with someone who might see all that as not enough. Lisa and I had a good marriage at first. At least, I thought we did. She stayed home to care for the kids, and I didn't mind that. I'd made sure that our house was well taken care of, and that there was always food on the table. Sure, I worked long hours and I wasn't always around, but I thought we were in this together. But then, the cracks began to show. Lisa began pushing for things that I couldn't immediately provide, things I hadn't planned for yet. We should move to a nicer neighborhood, she'd say. Somewhere more upscale, like Beverly Hills. It was clear to me that she wasn't thinking long term. I was working on building our future, making investments that would eventually bring us more. But none of that seemed to matter to her anymore. She wanted it now, and I could see the discontent growing in her eyes. But I kept trying to be understanding. I thought, maybe she's just stressed. Maybe it's the kids, the routine, the house. So I gave her space, hoping it would pass. But then, things got worse. She started complaining about the smallest things, diapers, for the baby being the wrong size, not properly preparing bottles, leaving dirty wipes on the changing table. At first, I tried to brush it off. I figured she was overwhelmed, but every time I pointed out an issue, she'd snap back at me, saying I was being too critical. I even hired a part-time nanny to help ease the load, thinking it might relieve some of her stress, but nothing changed. She would go out every weekend, disappearing for hours under the guise of grocery shopping, only to come home with almost nothing. When I confronted her about it, she would act irritated. "I just need a break," she'd tell me. I tried to be empathetic, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. She was lying to me. It wasn't just stress, it was something more. And then it happened, the thing I'd been dreading. One evening, I decided to come home early from work to surprise her. I knew things had been off for a while, but I wanted to believe it was just a phase. I walked in and noticed the kids were acting strangely quiet, which wasn't like them. I found Max playing in his room, but Sophie, who should have been napping, was nowhere to be found. As I walked to our bedroom, I could hear soft voices and the distinct sound of laughter. I froze for a second, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked harder. That's when I heard the distinct sound of footsteps scrambling to get dressed. Lisa was in there, with someone. The door swung open, and there she was, half-dressed, trying to cover herself with a sheet. The man who had been with her was hastily pulling on his clothes, trying to make a run for it. I stood there in disbelief, my heart pounding. The anger I felt wasn't just about her cheating. It was the complete disregard for everything we had built together. I wasn't going to make a scene in front of the kids. I stayed calm, at least on the outside. But when she told me that nothing had happened and that I was just imagining things, I snapped. I demanded to know who the man was, but she just shrugged. "You're crazy. There's no one here." I couldn't believe it. The woman I had trusted for nearly a decade was lying straight to my face. The days that followed that night were a blur, but every second felt like it lasted an eternity. I didn't know how to process what I'd seen. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw, but I had no intention of letting Lisa think she could manipulate me or gaslight me any longer. I didn't want to blow up in front of the kids, and I didn't want to make a scene. But I was done. I had always believed in being patient, in trying to work through things, but this was something I couldn't ignore. She had crossed a line. Lisa didn't even seem to realize the gravity of what had just happened. She acted like it was no big deal, as if she hadn't just humiliated me in front of my children. When she finally said something, it was just a weak, "I'm sorry you had to see that," and then an awkward silence. My mind was racing, but I stayed quiet. I didn't know if I could trust myself to speak without losing control. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to focus on anything. Lisa went on like nothing had changed. She was distant, acting like she was doing me some kind of favor by letting me process things. But the whole time, I could feel her pulling away further. She started to go out more, telling me she needed time to think, or that she had errands to run. I didn't ask where she was going anymore. I already knew I was losing her, even if she wasn't brave enough to admit it. A few days later, she came to me with a look of determination, like she was about to announce a great achievement. It hit me then how little she respected me, and how much she had underestimated the life we had built together. "I think we need to talk," she said, as though we hadn't just had the most explosive conversation of our lives a week ago. "I want a divorce." At first, I couldn't believe it. My heart sank, and I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I had expected this moment, but hearing her say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. She had no remorse, no hesitation. She was so casual about it, like she had been planning it for a while. I tried to remain calm, but the anger and frustration built inside of me. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, incredulous. "You want a divorce?" Lisa's gaze never wavered. "I just feel like I've outgrown this marriage. I deserve more, Nathan. The first to need an upgrade. An upgrade." She had the audacity to compare our life to some kind of software that had gone out of date. My chest tightened as the words sank in. This wasn't about love or our family. It was about her feeling entitled to something more than what I could give her, something that I thought she had already known wasn't part of our reality. I knew she had been unhappy, but this was worse than I could have ever imagined. She had checked out long before I ever knew. But instead of confronting me about her dissatisfaction, she found a way out, casually attaching herself to someone else. "Who is he?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lisa didn't hesitate. "His name's Ben. He's a great guy. He's successful, charming, and makes me feel alive. He's everything I need right now. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed just wasn't enough for her anymore. She had found someone who was able to give her a glimpse of the life she wanted, and I, apparently, wasn't capable of providing that. My world felt like it was crumbling around me. I kept it together. "So that's it? You're just leaving us for him? For a guy who can give you everything I couldn't?" Lisa shrugged, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've been emotionally checked out for months, Nathan. Ben makes me feel valued in ways you haven't for a long time. It's just how things are now." I didn't know what to say. I was numb, in shock. The woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted with my children, was ready to walk away from everything we had. And for what? A man who could offer her a different version of luxury. Someone who could indulge her while I spent years building something stable. Something that wasn't flashy, but had been our foundation. But this wasn't about Ben, not really. This was about how she saw me, how she saw our life. And I couldn't live in a marriage where I was nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. I took a deep breath. "You want out? Fine. I'm not going to stop you." Her eyes widened in surprise. I could see the expectation in her face, the hope that I would beg, that I would collapse into some dramatic scene. But I didn't. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. She wanted out. She could go. I didn't fight her. I didn't beg. I just quietly told her, "Take whatever you need, but the house stays with me." "I'm not giving up what I've worked for, Lisa." Her face twisted with anger and disbelief. "You're not serious, right?" "I'm deadly serious," I replied, my voice firm. "This house is in my name, and I'm not going to let you take it just because you decided to trade me in for a new model." That was when the truth hit me fully. Lisa had expected me to cave, to make this easy for her. She thought I'd let her walk out, that I'd let her have everything just like she thought she deserved. But I wasn't going to let her win like that. I wasn't about to be her stepping stone to a life she didn't appreciate. The next few days were nothing short of a blur. I walked around in a fog, feeling detached from reality. Lisa didn't seem to be affected at all by what had happened. She acted like everything was perfectly fine, like she hadn't just confessed to betraying me and wanting out of our marriage. If anything, she seemed more focused on her new life, the one she was upgrading to, rather than the life we had built together. She'd been so emotionally distant for months, but now it was as if she had already left in her heart long before this conversation. Every time she spoke, there was this sense of finality to her words, like she had already made up her mind about everything. But there was no remorse, no guilt. It was like she expected me to just roll over and accept it, to be the good husband who lets his wife go off into the arms of someone else without even putting up a fight. I couldn't do that. I couldn't just walk away from what we had without standing up for myself. Not anymore. I spent the following days working on what came next. I was done being passive, done being the man who was just going along for the ride. Lisa had made it clear that she was done with me, and that meant I needed to take control of the situation. I knew I had to stay calm for the kids and for myself, but I couldn't allow her to just walk away with everything. She had her upgrade, but I wasn't about to let her take the house, the one thing I had worked for and built from the ground up. I started researching lawyers. It wasn't something I was excited about, but I knew it was necessary. I wanted to make sure everything was handled legally, that the kids' best interests were considered, and that I wasn't left with nothing but emotional scars and a broken heart. I had already spent years building a life for us, and I was determined not to let Lisa take advantage of me. When Lisa found out I'd already spoken with a lawyer, she wasn't happy. It wasn't the reaction I expected. I thought she'd be relieved that things were moving along, that we could just get this divorce over with. But no, she was angry, as if she had been expecting me to sit back and let her dictate everything. She stormed into the living room, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You're already planning the divorce, huh? You've already made up your mind that you're the one in the right. What about me? Don't you think I've suffered too?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I didn't ask for this, Lisa. You did. You've made it clear that you're not interested in fighting for this marriage, so I'm going to make sure everything is handled the right way. I'm not going to just roll over and let you take everything." Her face twisted with frustration. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not going to let you take the house. It's mine too." I took a deep breath, standing my ground. "No, Lisa. The house is mine. It was mine before we got married, and I've paid for everything. I'm not going to let you walk away with something I built. You don't get to just take it because you decided to leave me for someone else." Her expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the gears turning in her head. I could tell that, deep down, she had assumed I'd just hand over the house and let her go. But she was mistaken. The divorce process itself wasn't complicated. Lisa didn't contest custody. She was content with a shared arrangement. But the financial side of things was trickier. Lisa demanded alimony, saying she had sacrificed her career to stay home and care for the kids. But I refused. I wasn't going to fund her new life with someone else. I had worked too hard for what I had to just hand it over to her, without any kind of responsibility on her part. "Lisa, I'll help with the kids," I told her. "But I'm not giving you money just because you're too proud to work. You're a grown woman. You've had opportunities to work, and you chose not to. Now you're going to have to figure this out on your own. I'm not going to keep supporting a lifestyle you walked away from." Her eyes flared with anger, but she didn't push the issue further. Instead, she moved forward with the divorce. I could tell she was expecting a fight, a scene, but I wasn't going to give it to her. She wanted drama. She wanted me to beg, to plead for her to stay, but I wasn't playing her game. I was done. She signed the divorce papers without so much as a second glance. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She thought she was upgrading to something better, but I knew better. She hadn't thought this through. She hadn't considered what it would mean to leave everything behind. We agreed on shared custody of the kids, though I could tell she was just going through the motions. There was no real fight left in her for the marriage, but she still expected something from me, something she was no longer entitled to. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind. The divorce was moving forward, and while everything was technically amicable on paper, there was a constant undercurrent of tension between Lisa and me. She expected me to just roll over and let her move on with her life, one she imagined would be filled with luxury and excitement. But the more I watched her make plans, the more I realized how delusional she had become. She had always acted like she deserved more, like her looks, her past career as a model, and her ability to charm people would be enough to secure her the life she wanted. But now, in the face of real consequences, Lisa was discovering that the life she thought she deserved didn't come so easily. She'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing glamorous, just a modest place that barely fit her idea of the upgrade she had been chasing. I knew that when she first left, she thought she'd land on her feet with a rich new boyfriend, living in some fancy high-rise, surrounded by luxury. But the truth was far different. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't as confident as she had been when she first decided to leave. The glimmer of excitement was gone, replaced by a nervousness she couldn't hide. Lisa's idea of moving on was nothing like the fairy tale she had imagined. She came back to me a few times, asking to see the kids, always acting like nothing was wrong. But every time she showed up, I could see how far she had fallen from her imagined life of ease. The kids had been asking about her more frequently, especially Max. He was old enough to understand that something was wrong, that Mom wasn't around like she used to be. Sophie, our youngest, didn't really understand yet, but Max was asking questions. Where's Mom? Why isn't she home with us? It broke my heart every time he asked, but I wasn't going to lie to him. I told him that Mom was going through some things, that we both loved him, and that she just needed some time. I wasn't going to make her sound like a villain to him, but I also wasn't going to sugarcoat it either. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that I would move on. But honestly, it was harder than I expected. The kids weren't the only ones who were affected. I was hurt. I was angry. And I wasn't just angry at Lisa. I was angry at myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for not realizing how deep her dissatisfaction went. The worst part was that she was so willing to throw everything away: the kids, our family, our life, for a chance at a life that wasn't even hers to begin with. She thought she was upgrading, but all she really did was trade stability for instability, comfort for chaos. And then, as if things weren't complicated enough, I found out something that left me shaking with disbelief. One evening, I was doing some work in my office when I heard Lisa on the phone. She wasn't being discreet about it. She was talking loud enough that I could hear everything clearly. She was talking to someone about her new life, about the man she was seeing, and about how things were looking up for her. But then, the name she said struck me like a ton of bricks. Ben. I'd heard her talk about Ben before. He was the man she'd been seeing after our marriage fell apart. The one who supposedly had it all together, who was wealthy and could give her the life she wanted. I had always assumed she was just chasing a fantasy. But hearing her talk about him in this way made me feel a deep sense of dread. She made it sound like he was her new savior, her ticket to a better life. But something in her voice made me pause. There was something off about it. She was so desperate. I had a sinking feeling that this was far from the fairy tale she had imagined. So I did what I had to do. I did some digging. I had always been pretty good at finding out what I needed to know. And I wasn't about to let Lisa live in her delusions while I was left picking up the pieces. I knew her too well. She wasn't exactly discreet. Over the months, she'd given me little bits of information, always trying to make me jealous, always trying to make it clear how much better her new life was going to be. She mentioned Ben's business trips, the cars he drove, the whiskey he liked. It was all designed to show off, to make me feel like I wasn't enough for her. So I waited until she was asleep, her phone beside her on the nightstand. I quietly took it and searched through her messages. And there it was, his full name, his profile, and the company he worked for. That was all I needed. I didn't waste time. I messaged him on LinkedIn, posing as a fellow investor, offering to discuss business opportunities. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. We started talking about investments, and before long, he was bragging about his business, his success, and eventually, about his personal life. He mentioned his wife and kids. He'd been married for over 20 years, with a couple of kids already in college. I asked a few casual questions about his relationship, and he casually mentioned how he loved his wife and would never leave her. His words were blunt, but it was clear Amy wasn't in his plans. At that moment, everything clicked. Lisa wasn't just delusional. She had been sold a lie. Ben wasn't going to leave his wife for her. He was just using her for a little distraction. The very thing she thought would be her upgrade wasn't what she thought it was. In fact, it was the complete opposite. Once I had the confirmation about Ben, everything changed. It wasn't just that Lisa had made a mistake in leaving me for him, but that she had also been blind to the truth about her own situation. Here I was, working hard to secure a future for our kids, while she was out there chasing a fantasy, thinking she could jump from one man to the next without consequence. And now, she was crashing down. I wasn't sure if I felt satisfaction or just a deep sense of relief. Either way, Lisa's upgrade wasn't going as planned, but I wasn't going to let her believe she could keep playing me, or anyone else for that matter. I had one final card to play, and I wasn't going to waste it. So, I kept it cool. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I waited for the right moment. I let her think that everything was still on her terms. She still walked around the house with her smug little grin, talking about how excited she was for the life she was going to have with Ben. Little did she know, I already knew everything I needed to know. It wasn't until one afternoon that I decided to put things in motion. I messaged Ben again and told him exactly who I was. I kept it professional, calm, and collected, just like I had in our previous conversations. I sent him a voice note explaining the whole situation, the truth about Lisa, and how she had been deceiving him. I told him about the kids and how she had been acting like they were an afterthought in all of this. I gave him the full rundown. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. A few hours later, I got a response. It wasn't what I expected, but it confirmed everything I had feared. Ben wasn't interested in a serious relationship with Lisa. Not at all. He'd already been married for years, had a family, and didn't want to leave his life behind for some woman who had 2 kids and an ex-husband in tow. In fact, he admitted that he had been using her as a temporary escape, a distraction from his own life. Lisa had thought he was going to be her knight in shining armor, but all he saw was a fleeting thrill. Lisa had traded everything: her family, her kids, her stability for a man who didn't even want her in the long term. She was nothing more than a casual fling to him, a brief diversion from his real life. And now, here she was, left with nothing but a broken dream. I felt a twisted sense of justice as I reflected on it. She had been so sure that Ben was her ticket to a better life, but she had misjudged him completely. She was just another woman, easily replaced in his world of luxury and distractions. I could see it now. Lisa had been so consumed with her desire for more, so determined to break free from our life, that she had failed to realize what was right in front of her. She had destroyed the family we built, thrown away her responsibilities as a mother, and for what? A man who wasn't even serious about her. And just like that, everything I had worked so hard to keep together was falling apart, but not in the way she thought it would. She thought she was escaping to something better, but instead, she had walked straight into a pit of disappointment. I didn't feel sorry for her, though. If anything, I felt vindicated. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. A few weeks passed after I messaged Ben. Lisa came back around. As expected, she hadn't changed. She wanted to see the kids, wanted to try and act like everything was fine, but I could see through her. She had that same empty look in her eyes, the same one I saw when she first decided to leave. She thought she could come back, slip back into the role of mother, when everything had already been shattered. She was pretending like she hadn't just left me to pick up the pieces of our family, like she hadn't just walked away from everything. I let her see the kids, of course. I wasn't going to punish them for her mistakes, but the moment she asked me to come back and be a family again, I shot her down. I told her flat out, I'm done. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it. She was stunned, clearly expecting me to beg her to stay, to cry and plead like I had when she first left. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't going to fall for the same game she had been playing. I wasn't about to beg for someone who didn't respect me, who didn't respect our family. She had made her decision, and I was going to make mine. I didn't want to make things harder on the kids. I had to keep a cool head for them, even though it killed me to watch them cry for their mom, even though it hurt to know that Lisa's selfishness was leaving scars on them. But I couldn't change that. I couldn't fix her mistakes, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I had my own life to rebuild, and I wasn't about to let her tear it apart. And then, it happened. Just as I had anticipated, Ben dumped Lisa. She had thought he was going to be her escape, her upgrade, but all he had done was play her for a fool. Lisa called me a few days after the breakup, sounding desperate and broken. She wanted to talk. She wanted to see the kids. She missed them, but I wasn't having it. You made your choice, Lisa, I told her, my voice steady. You thought you were upgrading, but you ended up with nothing. I won't be here to pick up the pieces. You don't get to walk in and out of our lives whenever it's convenient for you. The words were harsh, but they were the truth. And the truth was that Lisa had burned every bridge. She had left me and our kids for a life that didn't exist. And now that it had all crumbled, she had nowhere else to turn. She begged me to help her, to take her back, but I had already moved on. I had found peace in knowing that the best thing I could do for my kids was to let their mom face the consequences of her choices. I wouldn't make the mistake of trusting her again. "Enjoy your tiny apartment, Lisa," I said one last time. "I hope it's everything you dreamed of." After Lisa was gone, the silence in the house was almost unbearable. The kids were struggling, especially Max. He'd been asking for her every day, wondering why Mom wasn't around, why things had changed so suddenly. I tried my best to keep it together for them, to be the rock they needed. But deep down, I was frustrated. I had tried to be understanding, to keep things normal for them, but it was hard to ignore the hole Lisa left behind. I kept the house in order, cleaned up the mess she had left in the wake of her departure, but every time I looked at our old life, I felt a pang of regret. Not because I missed her, far from it, but because I missed the family we used to be. I missed the stability we had before she decided that more was better. I hated that the kids had to deal with the fallout of her actions. I'd see Max looking at old pictures of the three of us, and it tore me up inside. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to him, to Sophie, and it sure as hell wasn't fair to me. But I had no control over what Lisa chose to do, and I couldn't waste any more energy on the woman who left me to chase a fantasy. When Lisa called me again asking for the kids, I couldn't ignore it. As much as I wanted to, I knew that the kids deserved to see their mom, but I wasn't about to make it easy for her. I didn't need her to come back. I didn't need her to try and play the victim. What she needed was to face the reality of her choices. I let her visit, but I kept my distance. I could see the desperation in her eyes. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. The woman I married would have fought for our family. The woman I married would have cared about our kids and not just herself. But now, she was a shell of the person I once knew, empty, regretful, but too proud to admit she had made a mistake. After a few visits, it became clear that Lisa was beginning to see the truth. She wasn't getting the life she had hoped for. The money from Ben wasn't coming in like she had expected, and as much as she tried to put on a brave face, I knew she was struggling. She had given up everything she had, her family, her stability, her sense of self, and for what? For a man who wasn't willing to sacrifice anything for her. It wasn't what she imagined. It wasn't the upgrade she had been hoping for. I knew Lisa was spiraling. It wasn't hard to see. She came to me one day, asking if I could help her out with some money. Apparently, Ben had stopped helping her financially, and she was falling behind on rent. She had nowhere else to turn. I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence linger, knowing how much it hurt her to ask. She had put herself in this position, and now she was desperate. But there was no way in hell I was going to bail her out. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not going to help you. You made this choice. Now you have to deal with the consequences." Her face contorted in frustration. "You don't understand. I don't have anyone else. I thought this would be different. I thought I'd be happy." "Well, you're not," I said coldly, "because happiness doesn't come from chasing after some fleeting fantasy. You thought you could have everything, but now you have nothing. I'm not going to feel sorry for you." Lisa didn't respond. She just stood there, her expression a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. The truth hurt her more than she was willing to admit, and I wasn't going to be the one to cushion the blow. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I still think about Lisa sometimes. I think about the woman she used to be, the woman I thought I knew. I think about how we were once a family, and now we're just strangers living in the same world but on different paths. I can't pretend that I don't miss the idea of what we had, but the truth is, I've moved on. I've had to. I've learned that sometimes you have to let go of the people who are only holding you back. I've come to accept that what Lisa chose to do wasn't my fault. It's hard to let go of the guilt, though. Guilt that maybe if I had been better, if I had tried harder, maybe it wouldn't have ended this way. But I know better now. I know that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make someone love me if they didn't want to. I couldn't force someone to value the family we had if they didn't see it as enough. Max and Sophie are doing better. It's not easy, but they're adjusting. I've tried my best to make sure they know that they're loved, that they're enough, that their mom's decisions don't reflect on their worth. And as much as it hurts, I know that I'm giving them something better than what Lisa gave them: stability, love, and the promise that they won't have to question their place in this world. I'm not angry anymore. I used to be, but now I just feel pity for Lisa. She'll never realize what she threw away. She'll keep chasing the idea of the perfect life until she realizes that it doesn't exist. In the meantime, I'm going to keep moving forward, focusing on what matters: the kids, my work, and building the life I want. And if Lisa ever comes back, asking for forgiveness, or trying to manipulate me again, I'll be ready, but I don't think she will. Lisa got exactly what she asked for. the upgrade. And now she'll have to live with the reality of it. And as for me, I'm moving on. I'm building something better without her.